Okay, Year 3s, let's carry on with Chapter 5. And exactly what time do you call this? Susie jumped and spun around. The door stood wide open, but how? Surely she would have heard them, and she narrowed her eyes in confusion at the figure they revealed. It was a little old lady who might have been about Susie's own height, but for a slight hunch and the fact that she leaned on a cane for support. She wore a dress of heavy black lace that fell all the way to her feet, with a knitted black shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. Susie caught the discreet glint of a pearl necklace beneath it. Her hair was silver, and her skin was so pale it almost glowed, like the desert sands far below. She studied Susie with piercing lilac eyes. Susie tried to speak, but only a nervous croak came out. She cleared her throat and tried again. "I'm looking for the Lady Crepuscular." And should I tell you where you found her, or would you prefer to guess?" the woman said in a voice like cut glass. Susie forced a smile, knowing she was being made fun of. "You're the Lady Crepuscular?" The woman's own smile was tight and humorless. "You must be new." "Yes," said Susie. "It's my first day." "It shows." The woman looked Susie over from her cap to her slippers. "And what manner of troll are you?" "I'm not," said Susie. "I'm a girl, a human being from Earth." The smile snapped off in an instant, and Lady Crepuscular leaned forward to examine her more closely. "From Earth, you say? How curious." She extended a finger and prodded Susie in the chest as though checking she was really there. "You're a long way from home, my girl, a very long way indeed." Susie, who didn't appreciate being prodded one little bit, did her best to banish the image of her parents that the old woman's words had conjured up in her mind. "I've got a delivery for you," she said, preferring the parcel. "I know," said Crepuscular, "but since you've seen fit to make me wait this long for it, I think it's only fair that I take a little of your time in return. Susie wished she didn't feel so nervous. "I'm very sorry, but I've already apologized for being late, and if I stay any longer, I'll be even later for my next delivery." It was a perfectly reasonable point, but as she watched Lady Crepuscular's expression sour, she realized it had also been completely the wrong thing to say. "Then it seems to me, my girl, that you should have been more punctual to begin with." The shadow surrounding Crepuscular seemed to gather and deepen. "And if you will not give it up willingly, perhaps I should just take it from you." "What do you mean?" said Susie. But the Lady Crepuscular had already raised her cane and waved it in a circle above Susie's head. "There," she said, with a cold satisfaction. "Half an hour from your life. Now we're even." Susie examined the woman's features and tried to discern whether she was being made fun of again. "You can't do that," she said. "Oh, but I can, my girl. I just have. Half an hour of your time for the half an hour of mine that you wasted." The grim little smile crept back onto her face. "I don't believe you," said Susie, who honestly didn't know whether she did or not, but she was angry and still a little bit scared, and certainly wasn't going to let herself be picked on like this. "Oh, don't you?" Crepuscular raised her cane again. It was jet black with a silver tip that flashed in the lamplight. "I could take more, if that would persuade you. How about a year or a decade? I could take a century and turn you to dust where you stand." Susie took a deep breath and held up the parcel and the delivery slip. "Sign here, please." Crepuscular's eyes narrowed. For a moment she seemed poised in indecision, but then she reached out with her spare hand and snatched the parcel from Susie. "I shall open it first," she said. "I won't sign anything until I know you've delivered the right package and in a good condition." "Fine," said Susie, and watched as Crepuscular grappled with the parcel. It was small and well wrapped, and her wrinkled fingers had trouble getting underneath the layers of parcel tape. She began hissing with effort. "Would you like some help?" asked Susie. "Certainly not," snapped Crepuscular, but it was another minute before she finally tore through the brown paper to reveal a wooden box, like a jewelry box, but quite plain. Hooking her cane over her arm, she opened the box and withdrew something small and spherical, which glinted in the starlight. "And there you are at last," she said, holding the object up to the light. She shook it and gave a grunt of satisfaction. It was a snow globe, a glass sphere about the size of a tennis ball, set on a solid base pointed to look like grass. Inside the sphere was a small, bright green ceramic frog. Multicolored flakes of glitter swirled around it. Crepuscular held the globe to her face so close that her breath fogged in the glass. "You'd better be worth all the trouble I've been to." She tapped a fingernail against the sphere. "At least you look rather fetching. If all else fails, I can keep you on my mantelpiece. A nice little souvenir to see me through my twilight years." She seemed to have forgotten Susie altogether, and Susie had to cough politely before she looked up again. "Could you sign for it, please?" Crepuscular rolled her eyes, but snatched the form from her. "Pen!" she demanded. Susie froze. She hadn't even thought about needing a pen. She patted her dressing-gown pockets, but it was just for show. "I'm sorry," she said. "Do you have one?" Crepuscular rocked forward on her toes, bringing her face almost to level with Susie's. "Standards are slipping," she said. Then, replacing the snow globe in its box, she pivoted on her cane and stamped away into the depths of the gatehouse. "Wait here," she called back. Susie watched her go and got her first view of the tower's interior. To her surprise, it wasn't the darkened fortress she had expected. Instead of jet black stonework, the walls were white and featureless. The floor looked like a chessboard, all black and white squares, and a crystal chandelier hung from the ceiling, giving out a clear, cold light. Crepuscular set the box down on the small wooden table in the centre of the room before retreating through an inner doorway and out of sight, muttering under her breath. It might have been a trick of the light, but the shadows in the room seemed to bend towards her as she went. Susie waited, hugging herself against the cold. There was still no sign of movement from the train, but she gave a thumbs up in the direction of the sorting carriage in case Wilmot could see her. She doubted it, though. The wind was getting stronger, and the gusts of ice it carried were getting thicker. They hit the floor with a noise like distant wind chimes. The gargoyle still stared down at her from above, its teeth unnervingly close. She shivered and stepped inside the doorway out of the wind. "Help me!" Susie looked around in surprise. It was a boy's voice, small and faint, and she hurried back to the door, thinking that it must have come from the direction of the train. But before she had reached the threshold, it came again. "Over here, quick, please, help me!" The skin on her arms began to prickle. The voice was coming from somewhere inside the room, but there was nobody in sight. She was quite alone. "Hello?" she whispered. "Here, over here." She picked her way inside, letting the voice guide her until she reached the table. "Where are you?" "Where do you think? I'm in the box." She looked around again, wary of a trick, but as impossible as it was, the voice certainly seemed to be coming from the box. She opened the lid. There was nothing inside except the snow globe, the ceramic frog sitting exactly as she had last seen it. She picked the globe up and gave it an experimental shake. "Oi! How is that helping?" The voice certainly seemed to be coming from the snow globe, but the frog remained motionless. Then as Susie looked at it, it blinked. "You're alive!" she exclaimed. "Yes, alive and trapped in here." The frog spoke without moving its lips. "Please, don't let her take me. She's evil." "What do you mean?" "What do you mean, what do I mean? The Lady Crepuscular put a curse on me. She turned me into this frog, and now she wants to take me prisoner." "Wait, you mean you're a person?" said Susie. "Of course I am. How many ornamental frogs do you know that can talk?" "Sorry," she said. "I'm new here." She gave a worried glance at the door through which Crepuscular had disappeared. "What should I do?" "Take me with you," said the frog. "I don't know," said Susie. She could hear the distant sound of Crepuscular's cane against the floor tiles. It was getting closer. "Please," whispered the frog, "it's more important than you know. The fate of the impossible places depends on it." Susie's mind raced. This was all happening too quickly. But she remembered Crepuscular's sneer as she waved her cane above her head, the threat to turn her to dust, and then she stuffed the snow globe into her pocket as if by instinct. "Hurry!" the frog squeaked. "Shh!" hissed Susie. Her mind was still racing, but it had at least it had at least chosen a direction. She snapped the lid of the box shut and ran back to the open courtyard doorway, her heart drumming a painful rhythm in her chest. The ice storm was worsening, and she could barely see the train anymore. She turned back to face the room and leaned against the wall, trying to keep the fear from her face as Crepuscular hobbled back inside. I should deduct another minute from you for making me fetch this, she said, flourishing a quill pen fashioned from what looked to Susie like an enormous black peacock feather. But frankly, you're barely worth the raising of my wand, and I've more important matters to attend to. Consider yourself lucky. She unfolded the delivery form, stabbed at it with the quill, and thrust it back to Susie's face. Now get out of my sight. Susie took the form and ran. The wind hit her sideways, cutting through her clothes as though they were damp paper. She leaned into it, hurrying onwards with her eyes half shut, clamping her postie's hat to her scalp as ice crystals peppered her face and hands, every one of them a cold, sharp sting. The blizzard became so intense that after just a few meters she realized she had lost sight of the train. Don't panic, she told herself. You know it's in front of you. Just keep going and you'll reach it. But it was hard not to panic, with the guilty secret of the snow globe bumping against her thigh. She was sure the lamp in her pocket stood out a mile. She glanced back, expecting to see Crepuscular watching her from the gatehouse, but the doors were already shut. She breathed a sigh of relief and pressed on towards the train. Then she realized what she had seen and stopped. Very slowly, her body shaking with fear now rather than with cold, she turned to look at the gatehouse. The gargoyle was looking at her. Its head had been lowered, its eyes fixed on the spot in front of the doors. Now they were fixed on her. She stumbled backwards, not daring to look away, and its head moved with her, keeping her in sight. Her lungs burned, and she only realized that she'd been holding her breath when her back collided with something cold and hard, and she let out a scream of surprise. She whipped around, ready to jump away from whatever danger she had already walked into. The figure of a knight gloomed over her, its mouth open in a silent scream. She put her head down and ran, not thinking where she was going, just wanting to get away. Away from that thing over the doors, away from those awful statues with their twisted faces, and away from the cruel woman who collected people and years like trinkets. When we reach the train, don't tell them about me, said the frog, its voice muffled by her pocket. If they know you have me, they'll send me back. They wouldn't do that, she protested. They won't have any choice. It's their job. She gritted her teeth as she felt everything spiraling out of control. How had this all gone wrong so quickly? But there was no time to stop and think, and she ran on until she saw the dark shape of the train ahead of her, and piercing the darkness like alarms, the welcome glow of the lantern. Ahoy down there, came Stonker's voice. Hurry up, postmaster. I want to put this blasted place behind us. Susie skidded to a breathless halt. She must have lost her way in the panic, because she was at the wrong end of the train. She was standing in front of the locomotive, not at the back where the sorting car was. The spotlight of Stonker's lantern found her. Good grief, you again! Quick, she called. We have to get out of here. Stonker gripped the lapels of his coat and shot an imperious look down his nose at her. I'm going nowhere with a stowaway on board, he said, looking far more imposing than his short stature should have allowed. What are you doing here? Susie didn't wait to explain, but ran to the narrow ladder that hung down from the front end of the gangway on which Stonker stood. It was like a fire escape. She had to jump for it, but as she caught the bottom rung, the ladder folded down to touch the ground. She scrambled up to it until she was face to face with the astonished troll. I'm working, she gasped, plucking her deputy's badge from the front of her dressing gown and holding it out like a shield. Stonker gave it a long, black look. I think I'll be having words with our young postmaster, he said. Fine, she said, but not here. She grabbed Stonker by his collar and, ignoring his protestations, dragged him along the gangway to the cab's open door, where she bundled him inside. Before she followed him in, she glanced back across the courtyard and immediately wished she hadn't. Crepuscular was just visible, silhouetted between the open gatehouse doors, the light from inside casting her shadow across the flagstones. She made no move towards the train, and for a tantalizing second Susie thought she might let them go, until the old woman raised her hand towards them and her shadow began to move. It stretched out from her across the courtyard, sliding like a snake between the statues. Susie watched, horrified, as it began to put itself hand over hand over the flagstone towards the train. And that brings us to the end of chapter 5, year 3s. We'll see you next week for chapter 6.